All right, give me one moment, everyone. In the chat, for those that are able to see, this is going to be a unique share. It'll upload in a minute. I haven't really given a share like this for those that are familiar with the type of share that I typically give before the Chagim. They are more halacha based. There's a little bit more Gemara. There's a little bit more lamdish. I think suffice it to say, we find ourselves in a period of time which is, to say the least, it's unprecedented. The goal of this shir, I should say, it's unprecedented within our times. The goal of this is really, it's not going to be a traditional shir. I'm posting a link here, and it doesn't encompass everything we're going to say. But if you look in the chat, there's a link, and this is an open Dropbox file. This is a double-sided, it's a one-pager, it's two-sided, but it's a one-pager that you could come and you could bring to your Seder. The goal of this is to simply enable anyone and everyone to have Divrei Torah to say across all levels. We're gonna be quoting Gemaras, we're gonna be quoting Rishonim, we're gonna be quoting many Midrashim and Achronim, and we're gonna try to squeeze it in within the limited amount of time that we have. But the goal is, if you could tell from this link, it's a one-pager, double-sided. You could print it, you bring it to the table, and the goal of it, again, is not, you could tell it's very concise, it's multiple ideas, it's many bullet points, and it's more to encourage discussion with quick ideas and a quick lesson. You won't really be able to follow along completely with that for the shir, but I wanted to post that in there in the beginning for those that are able to see it. We're going to be doing a little bit more. We're going to be flushing them out a little bit more. If I had to give a mashal of the Divrei Torah that we're about to share, what I'm going to give to you guys, it's not going to be a steak that's cooked rare, but it's certainly not going to be well done. It'll be medium rare, it'll be medium well, maybe somewhere along those lines. But the goal here is to give something. We're not going to fully cook the steak, so to speak. We're going to simply give multiple ideas to what those need. And there's going to be multiple people here. There's going to be ones that are going to have smaller shadarim, and there's going to be people here that are going to have Seder by themselves, and we're going to have all levels and circumstances and situations. So with that said, let's begin. The greatest teacher and leader that we have and we've had as a nation is, of course, Moshe Rabbeinu. And before I begin with the actual drushos, for those that are able to get, before we really go into it, if you'd like to get a Haggadah, get a pen and paper, you could use the handout that I posted as a guide. But when it comes to the title of this year is to enable others to lead at their Seder. And what better leader to turn to than our preeminent leader of Moshe Rabbeinu in terms of how do a person can and lead in the setting we can have at these challenging times. No matter who's on this Zoom link, whether it's adults, children, teenagers, whoever it is, but there's a sense of leadership that we could all be displaying at the Seder. The Medrash in Shemos Rabbah tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu had been interviewed, so to speak, to become the leader of Klal Yisrael, it was a few incidents that Hashem looked at that gave him the job. One of those, and this is maybe well known, is that there was Moshe was a shepherd in Midian, and one of the sheep simply ran away. And he went and he tended to see where he had gone. He didn't even this one little sheep, he couldn't bear that it was missing. He had to go ahead and he had to take care of it. And he goes and he finds it drinking water, sipping water from a stream. I've known this medrash, many people know this medrash, perhaps you've heard of this medrash. It displays the sensitivity and the kindness and the attention to each individual sheep that Moshe had within his care. But I looked at the medrash one more time as I was preparing for you this evening. And the Medrash adds an additional detail. He didn't simply go and find the sheep. When he noticed that it was tired and thirsty, he went ahead and deduced that it must be weak. So instead of leading that sheep back to the rest of the flock, he picked it up and carried it along with everything else that he had. And that is a detail in sensitivity. It's that quality that Moshe Rabbeinu possessed that allowed him to be chosen as a leader. Many of us are going to be coming to the Seder dealing with large macro level issues, but there are going to be, quote unquote, for some of us that are zocheh to have even a few family members at our table, there are going to be those lost and tired sheep in our house that will be with us, and it behooves us to be sensitive enough to what is on their minds. As the leader of a Seder, know your audience. What is on our minds? What are we stressed about? What are those sitting around us? What are our loved ones anxious about? There are those who, unfortunately, especially here in North Jersey and in New York, and really it could be anywhere in the country at this point, of course, where we actually have people that are sick, they're in the hospital, we know of loved ones, we have family members, we have close friends who are going through traumatic moments. We have people who are simply unemployed, and it's devastating to go into a chag with everything else and all the health concerns going on, or people on the verge of becoming unemployed, people who have companies that are really going through extremely challenging times. We may have had ourselves, or those of us blessed to have spouses, who are looking forward to being at the Seder with children or grandchildren. And this is going to be a stark reminder to them when they sit down at a table that's significantly more empty. Or conversely, you're going to have kids that wanted to be with their parents and grandparents. And your kids, for those that are blessed with kids, are going to be aware of that. And then there's going to be ones, like I said, that they're simply going to be all alone by themselves and the difficulty they will have. There will be the smaller issues, kids who usually use school as a means to identify in a social setting in schoolwork or sports, and those are gone, and that's going to be difficult for them. And then there's everything else that we have going on with our regular lives, as if before Corona happened, we were all living in bliss. The goal here is to take stock, look around the table, think of where is the mind of some of the people that we're surrounded with, and understand that on the night of the Seder, there is a special koach, a spiritual force that allows us to break free from whatever may be dogging us down and weighing heavily on us. We all have an avoda, we all have our work really cut out for us this year, and that is to strengthen in our emunah in Hashem. That is the mitzvah, that is the goal of the Seder to begin with, and that is an objective that still begins for all of us. As the Shulchan Aruch paskins, that even if one finds themselves all alone at the Seder, we must go ahead and go through the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim for the purposes of strengthening our emunah in Hashem. With so much on our mind, it's important to know an idea that 2 weeks ago, I heard from one of my rebbeim, and at times when it's been more difficult for me with everything we have going on, I think of this Baal Shem Tov, and that is, we are where our minds are. We are present where our minds find ourselves, and we are present where our minds wander to. We may be physically in circumstances that are challenging, we may be physically in circumstances alone or difficult, but we are able to achieve through our mind and through increasing our relationship with Hashem. There's a special moment that could be reached and obtained on the night of the Seder. Our goal for the next few minutes is to enable you and arm you with the Divrei Torah to say this, to say ideas at the Seder table that can help accomplish this goal of strengthening our relationship with Hashem. This will be a different type of shir that I've given before. I've never prepared a shir like this before. I've never prepared a source sheet like this that I've given before, but I think there's so many of us out there who are looking to something to lead with at the table. So I thought, for myself included, and to share with you, to give you some of these ideas. By and large, I'm going to be employing different strategies in Divrei Torah we're going to share. There's going to be one point of view where at times, let's validate the challenges and difficulties that many of us are facing. Don't shy away from them. The Seder is not just a time to talk about the Geula of Mitzrayim, but let's talk about difficulties that may arise and other things that are going on in our lives, and try to find ways to have a Karsa Tov Hashem, not only for the redemption, but for other areas as well. And that's going to be one strategy I employ. And there's going to be another strategy I employ at times, which is to contextualize the hardships that we're facing. I paid a Shiva call over the phone a few weeks ago. And you can imagine this is someone who, again, the quarantine was in full effect for us here in Teaneck. And this individual is went through the most unusual Shiva, with people paying Shiva visits through Zoom and through the phone and through text message, not being able to be with their entire family or all the family members sitting Shiva perhaps. And everyone was sort of in their own place. And this individual said to me something so powerful, and this is towards the end of their Shiva, and they said, you know, even with everything and even as difficult as a Shiva that I experienced, she said, this person said, it's good to remember the context. At the end of the day, we are quarantined in our homes, but for many of us, our homes have running water, our homes are heated, our homes have air conditioning, our homes have food, we're still able to get food, you know, and it was these little things that this person was mentioning to me that made me realize, let's contextualize this as well. It's extreme. I had another person, an older individual, close to 80 years old, told me on Friday, she's never experienced anything like this in her life, and it's been extremely difficult for her and her husband on multiple levels. And that's true, and it's hard. And like I said, there's going to be times to validate that, and we shouldn't shy away from that. It's what's on people's minds. When we come to the Seder, and we're going to talk about this more in a few minutes, talk about that. But let's contextualize it as well. We're going to look at some of the past Sederim that may have taken place during the Spanish Inquisition, during the years of the Holocaust, during the period of the Warsaw Ghetto, and contextualize, as difficult as this was. Even if you go back to the first Seder that ever took place, it was a Seder that took place while we were still slaves in Egypt. And think about that. Let's contextualize, as difficult as these hardships are, within the greater hardships that our people have faced through the generations. And that's going to be an additional strategy I employ. And a third strategy, which again, this is my plan, and I encourage you as well, if it makes sense to you, is that I think that this year in particular allows us to gain a unique and deeper appreciation of different elements of slavery. You know, we have a din that liros es atzmos, the Rambam says laharos, to experience what it was like to be a slave and to go through that redemption process. I think on a very small level, it allows the mind to begin on a microcosm. By no means in any way should anyone misinterpret what I'm saying or misconstrue it, that we're going through slavery and it's as if we're slaves. It's certainly not the case. But I do believe that there's on some level an ability to be able to gain a little bit more of an appreciation for what took place in Egypt. So with that said, it looks like the link was copied and pasted again for those that would like to follow along. Again, not everything is going to be on there, but it'll be a good starting place to begin with. The first idea, which does appear on your sheet, is the idea, and again, we're going quick. We're not going to cook anything well done. We're not going to make it rare, but somewhere in the middle. The first idea is that from the Haggadah Chodesh Aviv, which talks about the fact that we break the middle matzah because there are times in life where we have good and we have bad within the same moments. And I think that's particularly true with everything that we have going on. You know, when we break that middle matzah, half that matzah, says the Haggadah Chodesh Aviv, represents the afikomen, which is obviously the symbol of redemption. That's what we ate. That's the celebration of Chag Pesach. But the other half represents the lechem oni, that poor man's bread, that difficulty, the bread we ate as slaves. It's that same piece of matzah, and it has two pieces to it. And I think there's a lesson there that we're no doubt going through difficulties. I mentioned in the beginning, talk about them. Don't shy away from them. Address the elephant in the room, quote unquote. But do an exercise as well. From that same piece of matzah, there's going to be another half. And that's another half of us that may be a little bit more difficult this year to look at the bracha and to have an appreciation of the bracha, but to achieve that ayin tov. And ask people, what are things that they may be thankful for this year? We're going to talk about that a little bit more as well. There's also an element here which the Rav talks about, that in Egypt, there were those who had more, even within our slavery. The socioeconomic stratus was not equal. We were not all of equal livelihood, and our tax returns all didn't say the same number. There were those who had more, and there were those that had less. And Yachatz is symbolic of the fact that we would split what we have, and we would give it to others. And that's an incredible message as well, that even when we find ourselves in difficult times and varying degrees of difficulty, have that appreciation to take care of those that have less, as challenged as we are. Remember, the slaves themselves did this. There's a beautiful medrash in Shemos Rabbah. It's not on your source sheets, but there's a beautiful medrash in Shemos Rabbah that talks about that when Yocheved and Miriam, they would go around and they would take care of the women that were in labor. So they would make sure that they were the ones that were poor, they would go ahead and they'd bring them water and food into their houses as well from the houses of the wealthier Jews. You see from this medrash, we had all sorts of Jews. We had everyone was a slave, yet there was those that didn't even have water, they didn't even have food, and we found the time as people, and we found the resources and the fortitude to be able to give to them. On that note, continuing to the next idea, we're going now right into Magid of Halachmanya. And we know that one of the ideas within Halachmanya is Kol Dichpin Yatev Yachol. Those that need a place to come, those that need a meal, those that need a place to sit, come, sit at a table, we invite you in. This is an expression of freedom to be able to invite someone in. What do we do as Jews? What do we do the night that we celebrate our freedom? We exhibit our freedom through giving through others. I think this year, for those that were in Rabbi Rothwax's amazing Shabbos HaGadol Drasha yesterday evening, he mentioned, and I didn't really fully appreciate it, but he mentioned that so many outlets of giving and being selfless are close to us. As I mentioned in one of our anecdotes before, we can't we can't perform nichum avelim. We can't comfort those in mourning. Almost just about every gemach is closed. Bichur cholim and visiting the sick, forget about it. We're all restricted. So on this night, on this Seder, on this holiday, where we exemplify this idea of our freedom by inviting people in. How do we display this chesed? And I thought very beautifully of an idea within Alei Shor, and that is chesed starts within the home. Chesed starts with those around me, those closest to me. And we have a unique opportunity. It's an unfortunate, the circumstances of the setting, but it's nevertheless a unique opportunity to grow during these trying times, chesed within the home. We can't literally go ahead and invite people in, but there's ways we could still display that chesed and give to others and those closest to us and encourage discussion around that at the table. There's another aspect of halachmanya which is very interesting. It says, Hashtahacha l'shana haba ba'arad Yisrael. That here, right now, we may have been in Egypt, right now we may be in slavery, right now we may be in Teaneck or New York or Chicago or California, wherever we find ourselves in. But Lashana Haba, let us be in Eretz Yisrael. This year we may be slaves, Lashana Haba b'nei Chorin. And that is an incredible lesson as well. We are always forward-looking as people. We may be enslaved at this moment. There may be difficulties we are experiencing at this moment, but we are expanding our minds in terms of what could be down the line and the prospects of what could be down the line. We go ahead and we look beyond the present situation, knowing that a Yeshua can happen. And certainly that was the case with Bnei Israel. And this, I do believe, is one of the ideas you have on your source sheet, which is that the Yeshua itself happened within an instant. We were slaves, we're slaves, we're slaves. One night Paro comes to us, tells us go, and the next morning we leave, which is incredible to think about. You had families, generations that came and went within slavery, and then within one night, it wasn't, okay, let's negotiate, let's do this, let's do that, let's talk about, a process. Within one night, the Yeshua happened within a blink of the eye. We need to be forward-looking as well and understand that no matter how difficult the prospects may seem, we are able to be forward-looking as well. Going on to Manishtana, again, moving quick, I encourage you, again, develop these ideas, write them down. I made the source sheet a bullet point for you guys for all of us to expand on. Going right on to Manishtana, I want to start out with this. This Pesach night, it's hard to imagine that there's a single person that their Seder is not different this year from the previous years. And for most of us, it'll be more difficult. It is not Latova, but unfortunately, it's for the worse. And again, it's going to be on people's minds. This is what I mentioned in terms of one of the strategies before. Do not shy away from it. Encourage that discussion for those of you blessed to have other people at your table. Let there be a free flow from that. At the same time, after that's done, I suggest to you to contextualize it, another one of the strategies we discussed. And I would do so with the following story, that in April 1942, there was a group of 22 Jewish partisans during World War II. And they were a group of Jews who were going and fighting the Nazis. And one of the Jews in the group, Moshe Abramowitz, had escaped from the town of Babarusk and had brought with him a very small siddur he had hid in his boots. Keep in mind the context of what we're talking about. They come to the Pesach Seder. They're in the woods. They're partisans. They're fighting, and many of them had lost their families. And I'm quoting to you from a diary of someone that was there. We had no matzah. We had no wine. We had no fancy meals that we're accustomed to. What kind of night was it going to be? And an individual there was the youngest, and I'm quoting to you, it was decided that I would ask the 4 questions, the Manishana. Imagine the setting of the Manishana that's going to be said in April of 1942. And he went ahead and he said to the questions that are different, of why is this night different from all other nights? And I replied, last Passover, all the Jews sat with their families at tables beautifully set with matzahs, goblets, and red wine. I'm pausing and I'm adding my own 2 words. For many of us, we're still going to be sitting, albeit with maybe less people at the table, but there's still going to be matzah and wine there. Last one of us, I'm continuing in his diary, each one of us had a goblet on our plate and listened to the oldest person conduct the Seder. Tonight in the forest, we are lonely and orphaned, having miraculously survived those who were taken from us forever. Tears fell from our eyes. After this, we continued to keep the traditions of all the Jewish holidays, which gave us the courage to survive. I'm not saying not to validate of why your kids or yourselves or your spouses feel this night is different from all other nights, but it's important to contextualize it as well. There have been so many difficult nights that we've gone through, and I'll be giving you a few other anecdotes to gain an appreciation for what we have by the difficult Sederim that have taken place in the past. Continuing right on, Avadim Hayinu, there was something specific that Avadim Hayinu Laparo. Again, this isn't so much specific to what we're going on, but it's something that I think about often, and it's one of the ideas that every year I'm reminded of it. That Paro, if you want to look at what was going on in the UN of the world while we were slaves to Paro and Egypt were the most established ruler and the strongest nation that existed. There was no one we could turn to. We were not slaves to some small rinky-dink type of country. We were slaves to the most powerful ruler of the most powerful country in the world. And you can imagine being enslaved with such little hope to turn to. How are you going to fight back against such a large, established, and strong country? And that's a moment to contrast. Because as we try to feel and to experience slavery in Egypt, liros it's asmo, it's an avoda, it's a work that all of us have, we could remember that what kind of helplessness may have existed for our bodies to be slaved. We know that we have some restrictions on a tiny level, and we know at the end of the day, we are confined in certain respects. But to say, Avadim Hayinu L'Par L'Mitzrayim, contextualize it. It's true, we're going through difficulty, but could you imagine what the Jews were like in Egypt? Could you imagine what it means for our bodies to have been slaves, to the Paro? Again, continuing on here, within this, on another idea with the Avadim Hayinu. Many commentators ask how, we just did the 4 questions. How is Avadim Hayinu an answer to those 4 questions? This is immediately following Manishtana. And there's one particular answer, there's many that are given, but I think there's one which resonated with me particularly this year. This answer I've seen in the past didn't resonate with me in the past, but this year I found a little bit of comfort in it. And that is that sometimes there's questions that we don't have answers for. Sometimes we're in this situation where we can't comprehend it. I've told this to many, not to many, but to a few individuals, I should say, that I speak to on a regular basis. And I cannot, while I'm relatively young, out of all the conversations I have, whether it's within the context of the community, talking with rabbis, within business, within family, within friends, I've never heard these 3 words used more often. We don't know. We don't know anything. We don't know when this is going to end. We don't know how it ends. We don't know what's going to be with us. There's simply a moment in time here where we have no answers and we're just simply going on faith. We don't know the answer to the questions. We have a lot of questions, especially for those who unfortunately have loved ones, and let's remember, we do have cases, many cases within our community and beyond, of those that have loved ones in the hospital, but we have questions that we don't have the answer to. And sometimes, and this is an idea based off Reb Nachman, we have questions, and just like the Manishtana and Avadim Hayinu does not answer the questions to Manishtana, sometimes we serve simply because of a pure simplistic faith. We want to try to understand, we would like to understand, and questions play a prominent role in this Seder. Encourage those questions are okay. But when we look to our children, when we look to our spouses, I'll say, you're right, we don't really comprehend it. I could try to give you all sorts of technical answers and reasons of why this is happening and how this is happening, and multiple opinions and levels and shitas of understanding and symbolism and all these things. But at the end of the day, I could do something much more simple and profound and say, I do what we do. We believe in Hashem. We daven to Hashem because we believe, and I don't have the answers to this. And I think there's a powerful moment to be vulnerable here. It's a safe moment to be vulnerable. You're not the only one that's not going to have an answer to what's going on. Just about no one has an answer to what's going on. So again, leave the complicated intellectual analysis for another night. What's the answer to Manishtana? Sometimes we have questions and we really don't have answers to them. And Avadim Hayinu, according to this approach, is not necessarily an answer to anything, but it's just simply saying it's a question that's unanswered, but we continue on with life, and we have this sincere, deep belief within Hashem. Moving right along, want to talk about the portion of the Haggadah that discusses the Maisa between Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, and Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Tarfon. There are different opinions within the context of what was exactly taking place here at this moment. Again, this is taking place in Bnei Brak, and Rav Menachem Tzvi Taxon, I think this is on your source sheets, says that this story took place, he suggests that this story took place during the Hadrianic decrees. They went to Bnei Brak, which was far away from Yerushalayim where the Romans were, because they wanted to be able to celebrate Pesach, not under the occupation of a foreign power, not under the occupation of an enemy, but they went to some place outside of Yerushalayim. They went into hiding. It was a place that had no windows, which explains why they didn't know what time that it was about to be Zman Kriyas Shema. They went in the middle of the night. They couldn't see the sunlight filtering into the room. And yet they stayed up the whole night, risked their lives, and showed Mesiras Nefesh to be able to show, to observe the halachos of the night and to do Sipur Tzias Mitzrayim to the best of their abilities. And I think that's a moment to contextualize that as difficult as this Seder was, when you reach this portion of your Haggadah, say, can you imagine what was going on for them? Can you imagine what was going on for the Jews and these rabbis as they sat there? I think there's another interesting idea to say as well. Rabbi Kiva is likely the one, says Rabbi Michael Epstein, he is likely the one that's leading the Seder. And that's why this Seder is taking place in Bnei Brak. The other four rabbis came to Bnei Brak to hear words of encouragement from Rabbi Kiva. And I think for all of us that are going to be sitting at a Seder and we have family and we have people there, I think that's important to keep in mind. There's 5 rabbis there, Rabbi said. There's 5 rabbis there. But there's and they're all living during the same period. They're all living under the same persecution and they're all living under the same setting. But one of them had the ability and had the strength and the koach to go ahead and to take what was going on and to be able to give chizuk and strength to the others. We're all going through something difficult, but for those that are leading or those that are going to be participating at a Seder, keep in mind, we could be that Yechidei Skula. We could be that individual that goes ahead, just as Rabbi Kiva was to his 4 colleagues. We don't have to be the greatest, we don't have to be the most amazing, but showing courage, showing strength and resolve and the best of our abilities to having emunah and faith in these trying times. Again, all 5 of them are living in the same setting, but it's Rabbi Kiva who's able to stand up and to lead during this moment. Moving right along, we have the 4 sons, and I think there's multiple beautiful ideas here that we could share. These you will find a quick bullet point summary, so to speak, within the source sheets, and that is as follows. The first one is in terms of the Chacham and the Rasha. There's a contrast here where the Chacham, the way he even phrases his questions, that you say to him is one that he's including himself, of course, within what's taking place. The continuation of the pasuk that's quoted for the Chacham implies that he's asking about what's going to take place. This is an idea from the Kli Yakar that's found, that he uses this word machar, and it's implying that the wise child is not simply asking on condition, I'm only going to perform the mitzvahs if I understand what's going on, but even after I actively participate in everything, and I'm going to do so, I have questions, but that's not going to inhibit my ability to go ahead and to participate either. It's a nasa v'nishma type of approach. We don't have answers. It's encourage the questions. This is the night of all nights to encourage questions. We're not going to have the answers to everything going on. But again, the Chacham exemplifies this idea that we go through difficulty while maintaining our strength, our belief in Hashem, and we try to find ways to strengthen it as well. I didn't put this on your short sheets, but I do want to read it to you, and that's a very powerful few sentences from Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Zichrono Livracha. What I received from all my mentors at home or in yeshiva was the key to confrontation in life, particularly modern life, in all of its complexity. The recognition that it was not so necessary to have all the answers as to learn to live with questions. Learning to live, and this is me now, I'm pausing Rav Lichtenstein, Zichrono Livracha's words. It's okay to live with questions. But again, within the context of continuing as we strive towards answering them and continuing within the ways of Hashem. I'm continuing the words of Rav Lichtenstein. Regardless of what issues, moral, theological, textual, or historical, vexed me, I was confident that they had been raised by masters far sharper and wiser than myself. And if they had remained impregnably steadfast in their commitment, so should and could I. I intuited that his categorical formulation and imperial certitude notwithstanding, Rav Hutner had surely confronted whatever questions had occurred to me. Later, I felt virtually certain the Rav had, so that he had depth and sensitivity of their services of Hashem was doubly reassuring. We can have the questions, and I think that was for me, I got such chizuk reading such words from Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. There are things that in his words vexed him, and that vexed many of us as well. But it was not conditional in terms of my avodas Hashem. On the son of the Tam, there's an idea here. There's an idea on your source sheet that I put regarding the Russia, which is that we say by the before I move on to the Tam, we say by the Russia that if he had been there, he would not have been taken out of Egypt. And I saw a beautiful idea, and it is there on your source sheet, and that is that someone that cannot have an appreciation and a recognition of Hashem and the nisim of Hashem, and to understand the koach of Hashem, will not have that same hashgacha pratis of what's going on. The way I think of it quite often is, as it was posed to me as a mashal many years ago, was that you got to think of it as a tango. We're dancing with Hashem, except we're the leaders in the dance and Hashem is the follower. If we take the initiation to show we believe in Hashem, Hashem says, okay, you put me in the picture, I'm going to follow your lead, and I'm going to insert myself into the picture. The Rasha takes Hashem out of the picture. The Rasha does not include himself with the picture, and that's an added idea as well, that's why if he would have been in Egypt, he would not have been redeemed. And I think for many of us, let's try to find ways, and we could talk about this, to believe and have amuna in that koach of hashgacha pratis in Hashem, because that is, I don't want to use the word conditional, but it's certainly central in terms of us having, and important to us being able to have yeshuos and salvations from Hashem. Regarding moving on to the next son, the Tam, this is one of my favorite vorts ever. I don't have like a top 10, like an ESPN Sports Center, but like this would have to be like one or two easily. And that is a drasha Rabbi Lamb gave in 1964 on Pesach. And he talks about the Tam, and he quotes this idea about the Tam, and it's fascinating. He bases it off in Akedas Yitzchak that says that typically we view the tzaddik as the, the golden boy, the top child, the model of what we could be, and we don't really get the Tam. Can you say he's the bad guy? Not really. That's he's taken by the Russia. You're gonna say he's the one that's like foolish. He's like a little bit, I don't want to use the word stupid, but low aptitude. So that doesn't make sense. That seems to be the She'enu De'alishol. So where does the Tam really to fit into all this? And he develops this idea so beautifully that Tam is not derogatory. After all, Yaakov Avinu, we say, Ish Tav Yoshev Olam. There's something beautiful in being sincere and simplistic. He uses the word wholesome. He's not looking to be overly smart. He doesn't display his scholarship on his sleeve. He doesn't talk about how great he is. He's not quoting Pesukim to you like the Chacham. Again, it's a unique approach. Typically, you think of the Chacham as the model. But he develops this very beautiful and profound idea that really of what the Tam represents. And that is, even by his question, he says, you don't even necessarily have to think the Tam has any less IQ points than the Chacham. He simply always comes to the table willing to learn, doesn't make himself overly smart, doesn't come off as pretentious. He says, Mazos, and he wants to have a discussion with you. You're not going to know how educated he is. You're not going to know how long he's learned for. You're not going to know that he was the top of his class in yeshiva. Again, he's not placing so much emphasis on the intellectual capabilities. But rather what he's doing is saying, I want to have a conversation. Let's go. This is a time where we're all together. Mazos. What is this? That's inviting a conversation. It's not putting anyone else down. It's not saying I know more than you. It's inviting the conversation. I think so many of us, whether we feel like we know a lot, certainly now many of us have that aspect of a tam to us. Moving on right along to and again, develop that idea. The Tam is really a powerful idea. He's not the bad guy necessarily. He is the model. It could be according to this idea of what I'm saying. And I think so many of us could learn from that of trying to be the Tam. Moving right along to the She'eno De'alishol. So he's the one that doesn't know how to ask. So what's our answer to him? Poteach lo. Again, this is what I've been mentioning and referencing all along. We encourage him to ask questions. We do not shy away from questions. There's going to be a lot of people at the Seder with you, and for those of you that are leading your Seder, they want to ask questions and invite them. You have a unique opportunity where the entire world, there's no way to feel insecure about questions in my mind in this moment in time. It's a unique opportunity for all of us to be vulnerable, to discuss what's on our minds, and it is particularly the night to do so at the Seder. Continuing right along into Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah Hayav Seinu, the Gemara in Pesachim on Kuf Tesvav that discusses that the structure of the Haggadah has to be as such, where we begin with the low points, and then only then do we end off in the high. And that is what this paragraph is doing here. We recall the lowly moments that we had. Our people were Ovdei Avodah Zarah. We recall the moments that of the dynamic between Yaakov and Lavan that existed, and that is there for a reason. Why does it have to be that the night of the Seder we have to have this start at the low and end up in the high? So I gave you a few answers there. One of them is by the Malbim, who says that the best way to make a point is by contrast. Only when we remember our past can we really appreciate what we have now and what we'll have later on. There's what you could find to be the contrast between our lives now and a month ago. I wrote a letter to someone. Yes, you heard that right. I wrote a letter. I sent it via email, but I wrote a letter for the first time since 6th grade. But I did write a letter. I sent it via email. I looked at the date on the letter. The date on the letter was March 4th, and it was wishing someone, it was a good news. It was a good feeling. It was Mazel and Bracha. And I went to go write a second letter to this individual under more trying circumstances on Friday. And of course, the date Friday was April 3rd. And the contrast between where we've been here in New Jersey, at least, and for many other places that are experienced as well, what changed within less than a month. And I couldn't stop telling Lisa, I was like, I don't get it. The moments that we have to contrast and to gain an appreciation for what we have. Maskil B'Gnus Masayim B'Shavach is there, so we contrast and gain an appreciation for life and for life before difficulty and life after difficulty. Talk about what we're grateful for. It's going to be a central theme. I'm going to come back to it later on as well. But again, the structure of why we put this here is specifically to gain an appreciation from the highs and lows of the Jews in Egypt to being ultimately redeemed under such awesome and magnificent circumstances. So too with ourselves, let's contrast those moments. Another idea on this as well is the Maggid Mikuzhinist talks about that sometimes we feel there's no hope. Sometimes we feel that's it. I've reached a low point. There's nothing I could do. There's no one I could turn to. I don't see a way out of this. I don't see how a quarantine ends. I don't see how businesses start again. If I have loved ones in the hospital, we don't have vaccines, we don't have cures, we don't have drugs. Where does it come from? Where does the Yeshua come from? Says the Maggid of Koshnitz. And he says we specifically structure the Haggadah as Maschil B'Gnos U'Mesayim B'Shavach, where we start with the lows and go to the highs, to talk about that we believe none of us are beyond Yeshua's Hashem. None of us are beyond our ability to reach and obtain a salvation from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. We all have that as well. The last idea, which I'll talk about here and maybe a few other places as well, and I think this is the one, I'll tell you personally, the idea I'm about to share with you is probably the one that I've been thinking about the most the last few days. In fact, I don't know if my father-in-law is on now, but he didn't really realize it, but last night him and I were talking, and he really hit this on the head and brought it up as well. And that is the idea of patience. Because things take time. They unfold over long periods of time. We don't see it right away. And we contrast those moments to say, you know what? I know where the story could start. It could start by Lavan, but it could really end with a moment at Kriyas Yamsuf, and it could end by Har Sinai, and it could end with Hashem bringing us into our own land with Yoshua. Life requires patience. Events occur, and we look for answers. We try to say how is this unfolding, and we're trying to desperately understand the deeper meaning of whatever we have going on. Look at the insights, bringing the talking heads. What does this one say? What does this doctor say? What does this executive say? What does this organization say? What does this agency say? It requires a passage of time. The Yeshuos of Hashem unfold not necessarily just within a moment, but we have to sometimes take a step back to be able to ultimately reach a point where we could have that shavach and that praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moving right along to the next idea, that in the paragraph of Baruch Shomer Haftachato LeYisrael, that paragraph ends with this sentence. For those that are following along with this with our Gada, Va'achrechein Yatzu B'Rechush Gadol, that we ended up leaving Egypt as we know with great wealth. I think I mentioned this at a Seder last year, 2 years ago, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm going to talk about my mom, I think she was like blown away by this idea, and we were like-minded in that where did all this wealth come from? So I get it. Okay, so you figure all the Jews are leaving, so whoever was around, they asked a little bit from this Egyptian neighbor, that Egyptian neighbor, they gathered what they had. But the idea is, Hashem made a promise to Avram, you're going to leave as a wealthy nation. So what did he do? He had all the wealth brought to the country we're going to be enslaved in, right? The famine occurred, all the nations of the world came, they pretty much went into heavy debt to be able to purchase whatever resources they needed for their own countries, for their own citizens, for their own populations. And Egypt, within a matter of a few years, became the wealthiest country that existed. And all that wealth is there. And what happens to that wealth? That Hashem put it there and gave us the ability to take that. Again, it's a chesed from Hashem. It's trying to find the ayin tov. It's a moment. I'm giving you this story as well, this idea as well, because of course, as you can tell, all these things we're trying to, one way or another, tie back either to the shibud, to the slavery of Egypt, or to Sipur Chas Mitzrayim, because at the end of the day, that is the ik goal. All these vorts, if you notice, have a theme of trying to really gain an appreciation of being Mekayim, the mitzvah of Sipur Chas Mitzrayim on the night of the Seder. So again, you have an appreciation and you try to find the ayin tov of what Hashem brought by accumulating the wealth of all the countries in the world for us to take it. Behisha amda lavosenu is something which is one of those contextualizing moments I talked about. I think this is an amazing opportunity to contextualize. I'm going to put my email in the chat right now because I have collected a few Holocaust and Spanish Inquisition stories, which I have found profoundly inspiring. And I think for those, you don't have to read all of them, but for those of you, feel free to email me and I'll put it together and believe it, I'm going to send it out. I'll format it nicely. I'll send it out before Leila Seder. But again, I put together just a few of the Siddharim that have existed in the past during the Spanish Inquisition. So for those that know, The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising occurred on the first night of Pesach. You have all sorts of Sederim. You have Sederim that were kept in concentration camps, and again, it's a moment to contextualize. Many of us are feeling, and we should, and it's okay, and myself included, that these are, like where Bobby talks about, you may sin up. These are times where sometimes it's difficult and we have questions and we're burdened and we're frustrated. But sometimes it's important to contextualize as well. And each one of you at your own Seder, lead that balance as the leader. When is it a moment to contextualize? When is it a moment to validate and to talk about what's on people's minds? But both are important. For Vihisha Amda, look out for that email. Email me if you'd like some of those stories to help you contextualize this point of your Seder. Moving right along. We say in the Agada as we go through the various psukim trying to detail and understand the hardship, the shibud, and ultimately the salvation of Hashem, that they made our lives hard. They made it difficult. And there was two different midrashim that I'd like to share with you in that regard. One medrash is, I think I mentioned this to my Shifty shir this morning, so for those that were there, I apologize. But one medrash is that they just tormented us, the Egyptians, for the sake of tormenting us. They worked us hard for the sake of having us work hard. And it was just frustrating work that was pointless work. It was not constructive, was not productive. It had no to'eles per se. And two midrashim that really exemplify that is one that says that they would order them to build on foundations that were specifically rocky to begin with, that they were built on in areas that weren't going to be able to withstand the building. And the infrastructure was poor. And they did so because they didn't actually care about the building. They cared about tormenting us. And the second one, the medrash I would like to share, is that they would order them to build during the day, and then they'd ask us to destroy it at night, which is the most frustrating thing. You're doing all the work. It's like, imagine you're putting a pizza together in a toaster, which is the extent of my culinary experience, and you take it right out of the toaster and it falls. And it's the most frustrating thing for a guy like me who took the time to put the sauce and the bread and it comes. But imagine, again, contextualize it, the lack of not being able to be productive and constructive, and the shibud and that form of just harsh labor work with nothing to show for it. I think this is a moment to contrast. When we talk about how difficult our Egyptians made our lives, I think many of us, some of us are having more time on our hands than others. Our kids are, in some ways we are. Sometimes there are moments in the day where we're much busier, and then there are moments where people are staring at the wall wondering what to do. Being able to be productive and to show progress is something that is so central to the human spirit. And the Mitzrim knew that, which is why they ordered the work to be done in such a way that was the antithesis to productivity. So talk about what could we do to be productive? Maybe there are no classes, there's no Chol Hamoed trips that are going to be taking place Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. What are we going to do? But there are resources. There are times. There's so many shirim. If you type in the word Zoom to your Gmail inboxes, all you're going to see is emails from rabbis and shuls about everything that's available. And it doesn't have to be Torah. There's other ways to be productive as well, but to simply not waste the time, to use it as an opportunity. Wasting time and that suffering of not being productive is how they tormented us. We, in our own ways, again, moment to validate and to learn from. We could learn on ways to accomplish. The next medrash I want to share, this is not a medrash I knew before this year, and this is another one I got tremendous chizuk from this, I have to say. V'nitzak el Hashem Elokeinu Avosenu, that we cried out to Hashem. There's a medrash that says that Moshe Rabbeinu, he came back to Egypt, he came from Midian back to Egypt, and the sight that greeted him was Aaron being the Shliach Tzibor, and it was leading the people in davening. But I want you to think about at what moment in time this was. Moshe comes back to Egypt from Midian at the very end of the Shibud. He's coming towards the end, beginning his confrontation with Paro, which ends in about a year later. So at the very, just think about that. When we talk about the Koach HaTfilah, here you have generations and families that have come and gone, people that were born into slavery, people that died in the slavery, people that we were murdered, we were killed, we were punished. And after all that, we're not talking about 5 years, we're not talking about 10 years, we're talking about centuries of being in that gullus, and we never gave up. And that image of Aaron, you can imagine them and their families, their parents were slaves, the slavery that existed, and they turned to Hashem and employ one of the most powerful tools we have in our Jewish arsenal, which is Hakol Kol Yaakov, which is of course tefillah. No matter how helpless we are, and we are of course not more helpless than the situation that Aaron was when he was leading his meaning in tefillah Hashem. We always turn to and employ that koach tefillah as well. We must never give up on that. Moving right along, this is one which, for those that have been following in the news, even if you've seen a few of the press briefings that have been taking place from the White House, you're going to notice a term that that was mentioned there. When we talk about this section of the Haggadah that I'm in, it says, "Vayamas Melech Mitzrayim, v'nitzak el Hashem," and in continuation, "K'moshe Nemar, v'yehi b'yamim harabim hahem, vayamas Melech Mitzrayim." And the king of Egypt died. Why is it specifically now there seemed to have been an emphasis on the tefillah that was taking place? Right when the Egyptian king died, there was tefillah, there was crying out. So one of the ideas that I saw is typically a slave is when they're looking forward to a change in leadership. They're looking forward for a coup. A new leader is going to come in and life's going to be better under the new leader. Out with the old, in with the new, life is going to be better. And they were looking forward to that. They said, oh, this Paro, he was terrible to us, what he's done to us. But don't worry, with the next Paro, there's no way someone would allow this type of cruelty to continue. There's no way someone would allow this to continue in such a state. And they looked forward to that new king. And what happens when that new king comes? Not only doesn't it get better, not only doesn't it stay the same, in fact, it gets worse. And the situation becomes hopeless. And I think, especially if some of the people that have been following the news and watching the press briefings from this past week, and even some of the stuff from this morning, in certain ways we feel in our own situations, it's becoming a little bit helpless. We have nothing to turn to. We have no one to turn to. We don't know who, what kind of tools to employ. We're all in the, by and large, to varying degrees, we're all in the same boat. Certainly those who are facing difficulties, Rahman al-Islam, who have people in the hospital, who could they turn to? What kind of medicines, cures that are validated and are for sure working for everyone, and it's accessible for everyone? It is so difficult. But yet, it's specifically at that moment where Klal Yisrael was helpless. The new king comes, nothing gets better, it gets worse. Where they said we have nothing else to turn to but HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have no other lifeline to even hook ourselves to, but to turn to Hashem and Tefillah. And I think that is a powerful idea as well, that we're finding ourselves in something where no nation is spared, no part of the world is spared, no person is not affected in one way or the other. We too have no options of where else to turn to, now more than ever, but we must turn to, and we can turn to Hashem. Moving right along, this was the pressure, and this idea is on your source sheets for those that have it, your one-pager, where the Ramchal points out here a beautiful idea that what the Yetzer Hara does to us in general in our lives is he puts pressure on us that doesn't allow us to think clearly, doesn't allow us to process information clearly, and it's going to become difficult. And we're not going to make the right decisions because we're anxious and our head is just in a million different places. And that's what the Yetzer Hara wants. He wants us to lack menuchas nefesh, to lack tranquility, in order that we make mistakes. The Mesilas Yesharim in the second parak says something so powerful. He said, that's not just the strategy the Yetzer Hara employed. That's the same strategy Paro employed. He didn't want us to have a second of menuchas nefesh. The way the work was structured, the way the slavery was structured, the way the labor was structured was in such a manner that didn't give us a second of menuchas nefesh, and he did so strictly from a strategic standpoint. He says the Jews won't be able to organize, they won't be able to think clearly, they won't be able to process information clearly, they're going to make mistakes. And he did so for the purposes of us not being able to unite ourselves, not being able to think clearly. We have the ability to work on ourselves, to try to think a little bit more clearly now more than ever. We're at home, we have the ability to, we have social distancing, and that's hard on many levels, but there's an opportunity within social distancing to regain an aspect of our menuchas nefesh, to regain an aspect of our lives, being able to disconnect, because an element of slavery was to not being able to have a clear mind, and an element of freedom is to be able to have that serenity and that clear mind to process information. Moving right along, this is not on your source sheets. There's an idea here from Rav Shechter that it says lo el de malach v'lo el de saraf v'lo el de shliach el HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvodo v'atzmo. HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself was the one that led us out. Again, I think the idea here is that there's a special idea of hashgacha pratis that occurred in terms of makas b'choros, that it was a HaKadosh Baruch Hu that was able to specifically decide which houses would be passed over, which ones weren't, and it's something that's specific to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he's able to do so. And we have to remember that element of hashgacha pratis, that only HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have been able to employ to mark this house and not that house, for this house to be affected and not that, and not another house to be affected right next to it. We have to strengthen and have that idea of a Kadosh Baruch of hashgacha pratis in our times. Moving right along here is the 10 makos. I think this is the 10 makos. I think presents an opportunity. I think this is one of the moments where it's a little bit easier with what we're going through. We have a little bit on a microcosm and appreciation for what the Jews underwent, and we're going to be wrapping up quite soon. We're a little bit of an appreciation for what the Jews underwent, and that is as follows. If I tell you we're fighting something now, as all of us know, it's people that are, it's spreading, and we don't always know how it spreads. It's spreading. We can't trace the point of contact, who coronavirus went to, who it didn't go through. Is there anyone, is there a community that's not affected? Can you say these people are immune to it? Not that I've seen. If someone has seen it, please let me know. There's no, it's completely indiscriminate. And I think there's a moment to appreciate the godless of the 10 makos, because these were makos that specifically struck the Egyptians and not the Jews. And it just shows you the wondrous ways of Hashem's. Here we're dealing with something, it's affecting everyone, and you can't, as much as we're trying quarantine, this, that, the other, we're minimizing the spread, we're lowering the curve, right? We're doing all these things, but at the end of the day, it's going after everyone. Could you imagine for some of the makos that took place, including some like lice maybe, or dever, or all these things with the blood, with the frogs, it's only affecting a specific segment of the population? Again, develop that idea, talk about that idea, that there's a special opportunity, here to gain an appreciation for the godless of Hashem. Moving right along to another idea on this, the barbanel. This you have on your source sheets, but again, I cooked it a little bit rare for you. I'm going to make it medium well. The barbanel talks about that the whole point of the 10 makos was to have an appreciation of a HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he created the world and he continues to run the world. There's a term that's being used in the White House press briefings that I can't get over, and that is we're dealing with an invisible enemy. And you're seeing the leaders of other countries use this as well. If I'm not mistaken, the leaders of Germany and France have employed similar language and that terminology. And I think, me personally, when I see that, there's a moment of awe of turning to Hashem and to say, who else but God could do this? We're all locked down. There's no dictator. There's no oppressive leader. There's no even, Rahman al-Islam, human terrorist that we could point to at the source of what's going on. It's an invisible enemy, and there's no one else. If the makos were there to establish, as the Barbanel and the Ramban and others say, to strengthen and to have this appreciation of as the Kadosh Baruch Hu created and continues to run the world, how much more so ourselves can gain a little bit of a microcosm of an appreciation for what we're going through in our lives. Talk about the invisible enemy. Talk about that there's this force, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, it's the night of the Seder. It's a moment to build our emunah. Moving right along, we have an idea here from Rav Zichas, B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam liros es atzmo, kihilu hu yatsa Mitzrayim. Rav Simcha Zissel from Kelm notes that if one assumes that we're supposed to imagine ourselves as if I actually left Mitzrayim, then we're really tasked with something that only people on a really high level will be able to fulfill. You'd really have to develop the right imagination to really go through that process. So it makes it a little bit easier. And this connects with what I was saying previously, which is We're supposed to try to get to the same level of Muna and feeling that Bnei Israel had when they left Mitzrayim. Can we imagine being slaves and coming out? That's for the Chidei Skula. But could we find ways to work on our Muna and to use different opportunities of what we're going through some of the stuff we learned together, through other things, to strengthen our Muna? The point isn't to say the every little vortlach. Don't use everything that I'm giving you. Use what you think is helpful. But the ultimate goal of the night, says Rozim Chassidus Mikal, is that when we say liros es atzmo, to say that I really, it's if I say kilu yatsa mitzrayim, that's hard. But find ways to work on our Emunah and to have and accomplish that same feeling to some extent of what Bnei Israel might have felt when they left Mitzrayim. I want to conclude with a vort on Dayenu, an incredible story that I heard on Friday, and that is that there was an individual, and this is a real story. I saw it circulating last week, but it is confirmed and it is real. There was an individual, an elderly Jewish man in his 70s, well into his 70s from what I understand, who unfortunately was hospitalized with the coronavirus. And he, thank God, did get better, Chasdei Hashem, and after a few days, he was handling his paperwork to be discharged. And he goes to the front desk, and they're going through the bill and they're showing him everything he's got to sign off. And he notices on one of the line items, it says oxygen 24 hours, $5,000. And the man begins to cry. And this elderly Jewish man starts sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And an administrator comes over to him and he says, "What's wrong? Are you okay? Is everything okay?" He says, "It's just this line of oxygen for 24 hours, $5,000. The administrator says to him, "Your insurance is going to cover it. I see your paperwork here. You're going to be fine. It's just showing what the numbers are. Don't worry about it. You don't have to pay this." And the elderly man says, you misunderstood me. I'm not worried about the dollar amount. But that's what 24 hours of breath and life and oxygen cost me, just for one day. And how many times have I gone through life? How many steps have I taken in life? And I didn't have an appreciation. It never occurred to me that I have to pay the sum of $5,000 just to be able to breathe. Something that you and I right now, Baruch Hashem, B'li and Hara, are able to do. I think one element of Dayenu is that it's so hard. You see where we started and you see where we ended. Can we really say it would have been enough if we would have just, for example, come to Har Sinai and not been given the Torah? Would it have been enough if it would have taken us out, but not in Kriyas Yamsuf? What does that mean? The Egyptians would have still been chasing us. What do all those terms mean? He would have brought us to the desert, we would have been wandering, and wouldn't have brought us into Eretz Yisrael. It's having an appreciation for every step of life. At every moment, having an ayin tov and turning to Hashem. There's a 24-hour period where it costs someone else $5,000 on a bill to breathe. Is it enough to just breathe without anything else? No, there's other parts of our lives that are important. But do I take a moment at each individual moment, each individual step, to have an appreciation for what's occurring, the oxygen that I'm breathing, my loved ones that are around me, not taking anything for granted, having that individual moment of Akar Satov for each and every moment in our life. My bracha to all of you. My email is in the chat for those that want. The source sheets are there. If you didn't get them, bring them back to me. Use them to the way you see fit. It is one page. You just have to print it double-sided, but it is a one-pager. Come to the Seder to discuss with others. Like I think I heard from Rabbi Rothbach's beautifully. People ask him all the time, "What's your favorite Haggadah?" He has many favorite Haggadahs. He answers them, but he says, "I come with a simple Haggadah to go and to learn and to discuss with those around me. I'm not looking at Vord, crossing this page, that page. I'm there to be present with my family. I tried to, in some microcosm of a way, to give you a piece of paper that enables each and every one of us to do that. And my bracha is that we should be a gadol. What does that mean, a gadol? Rabbi Lamb's Vort on Shabbos HaGadol drasha that he gave in the 60s talked about that. The reason we call it Shabbos HaGadol was the miracle was, of course, that we had the courage to go ahead and to take a Avodah Zarah of the Egyptians, that lamb, and to tie it to our bedposts. We didn't know what would be. We didn't know what would be the day after. We didn't know how the Egyptians would react. But that was a miracle in courage. How big is that miracle? After all, there were so many miracles we experienced. You talk about Kriyas Yamsuf, you talk about the Esher Makos, everything else that occurred in the Midbar. That's the miracle, asked Rabbi Lam, that we're going to call a Nes Gadol. He says yes, because that was one that wasn't about what God was doing in the air, but it was about what we're doing in our own homes. It was the courage that we exemplified in our own homes. And our bracha for myself and for all of us should be that we should exemplify and be a gadol, each and every one of us, to those that are close to us, to our loved ones, and to be able to really be B'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Please let me know, email me, text me if there's anything that I could help anyone with during this time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Shkoyach. Gabay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Sason.
Of course.
It's very helpful. Thank you. Chag
Thank you,
Sameach.
everyone. Chag Sameach, everyone.